Hello, and welcome to the show. This is the Kelcie Witchno Show. Hi, hello, and welcome back to the Kelcie Witchno Show. My name is Kelcie. I am your host, and I'm an alcoholic, baby. In today's episode, I talk about all things relapse. I talk about the 8 phases and what they look like, plus feelings, behaviors, and solutions, high-risk situations, plus my personal risks, what are healthy boundaries and tips for setting them, and finally, I teach you a controlling exercise using my crystal ball. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Also, I would love to do an Ask Me Anything, so make sure you guys ask any questions that you may have for me in the comments. I would so appreciate it, and maybe your comment will be featured on my next bonus episode. Come on, let's go. You gonna learn today. When I first got out of rehab, relapse was heavy on my mind. Knowing the warning signs of relapse was very important to me. The signs of relapse often come in phases, and they are often non-linear. We're going to go through each phase and talk about how it can look. These may look different from person to person, and the order will most likely vary as well, so please take the phase number lightly. But for the average person, these are the orders of which they come. Let's get into them. If you're watching the video and you keep seeing me looking down, I have notes in my lap from the program curriculum, and I also have some notes that I took. Pardon me for that. If you're just listening to the audio, then just disregard that last message because it doesn't matter to you. Phase 1 is internal warning signs of relapse. During this phase, recovering people experience the inability to function normally within themselves. This might look like daily hygiene is not being taken care of. You may be prioritizing using alcohol or your drug of choice. You may have negative emotions or thoughts of using. Phase 2 is return of denial. During this phase, recovering people become unable to recognize and honestly tell others what they are thinking or feeling. This looks like internalizing, rationalization, not being honest with yourself, and replaying a negative tape in your head over and over and over again. Phase 3 is avoidance and defensive behavior. During this phase, recovering people don't want to think about anything that will cause the painful feelings to come back. As a result, they begin to avoid anything or anybody that will force an honest look at self. When asked direct questions about well-being, they tend to become defensive. This could look like not wanting to talk about drinking and recovery all the time or the painful emotions surrounding it. This particular phase was heavy on my mind right when I got out of rehab because I knew that recovery was a part of my life now, but I didn't want to have to be talking about it all the time. So I was starting out by wanting to avoid even talking about it at all, which is crazy because now that's all I want to do is talk about recovery. In this phase also, there would be a need to establish a boundary, which we will talk about later on in today's episode. Phase 4 is crisis building. During this phase, recovering people begin to experience a sequence of life problems that are caused by denying feelings, isolating self, and neglecting the recovery program. Even though they want to solve these problems and work hard at it, 2 new problems pop up to every problem that is solved. The most common warning signs are these next few phases. One of the things is digging yourself a deeper hole. Things start going bad, and it's just a negative downfall of things. Phase 5 is immobilization. During this phase, the recovering person is unable to initiate action. He or she goes through the motions of living but is controlled by life rather than controlling life. This could look like complacency, just being okay where you're at, not wanting to get better but not wanting to get worse. not living in the present, either living in the future or living in the past, just showing up, being unproductive, just existing and getting by. This phase just really, it's immobilization. It's on being stagnant where you're at, not getting better, not getting worse, just being okay with being blah. Phase 6 is confusion and overreaction. During this period, recovering people have trouble thinking clearly. They become upset with themselves and those around them. They become irritable and overreact to small things. This could be suppression or avoidance. You could be hyperfixated on addiction, or really you could become hyperfixated on anything. Phase 7 is depression. During this period, the recovering person becomes so depressed that they have difficulty keeping to normal routines. At times, there may be thoughts of suicide, drinking, or drug use as a way to end the depression. The depression is severe and persistent and cannot be easily ignored or hidden from others. This depression could also be magnified if you decide to start using during this phase. I also drew a picture of a hill. During phase 7 of the hill, you are going down. During phase 4, you were at the very top. So in crisis building, you're building till you get to the top. And immobilization, you're kind of stuck at the top. Confusion and overreaction, still kind of there at the top. And then depression, you start coming down the hill till you get to phase 8, which is behavioral loss of control. During this phase, they become unable to control or regulate personal behavior and daily schedule. There is still heavy denial and no full awareness of being out of control. Their life becomes chaotic and many problems are created in all areas of life and recovery. This is where the brain kind of goes on autopilot. You're disconnected from reality. You're isolated with your own thoughts. Dry drunk is a phrase that I've learned, and it's where you're miserable around other people, even when you aren't drinking, but people around you are. So it's a situation where you're with your friends, all of your friends are drinking, you're not drinking, but you're so miserable that you're bringing the weight of the whole party down. And that is just a terrible place to live, obviously, as any of these phases are. If you find yourself in one of these phases, it's great to recognize that you are in an early phase of relapse. That way you can get yourself off of that hill, if we're going back to the hill reference. When I was in rehab in Palm Springs, I filled out my early signs of relapse activity, and because I want this podcast to be as personal as possible, I want to go through and share with you what I wrote. I did this activity on December 12th of 2022. So let's see. In this activity, we began to identify our own relapse warning signs. We were to select 3 warning phases from a list, or we could choose our own that we identified with. Make a list of the feeling and the subsequent behaviors that occur when you are in that particular phase. Think about and make a list of solutions that you can use to get you away from those feelings and behaviors. Number 1 was filled out, and I went through and I picked 4 phases and did the feelings, behaviors, and solutions for those. Phase 1 is internal warning signs of relapse. Feelings associated are sad, afraid, confused, and angry. Behaviors are isolate, argue, throw things, slam doors. Solutions are seek sober friends, take a time out, take a mindful walk. I chose to go through phase 2, 3, 6, and 7. We'll start with phase 2, which is return of denial. Feelings associated for me are ashamed, guilt, hesitant, and anxious. Behaviors associated would be isolate, lash out, tiptoeing around things, and giving short answers. Solutions that I said would be talk to someone, journaling, meditation, or take a walk. Then I chose phase 3, which is avoidance and defensive behavior. For feelings, I put worked up and impulsive. Then I did not fill out behaviors or solutions for phase 3. I chose phase 6, which is confusion and overreaction. Feelings associated are confused, shocker, angry, impulsive, and irritable. Behaviors are lack of communication, yelling, not thinking things through, and lashing out or isolating. Solutions would be journaling, taking a pause, or working out. And lastly, I chose phase 7, which was depression. Feelings were helpless, sad, lost, and unsure. Behaviors are isolate and avoidance. Solutions would be ask for help, journal, or talk to someone. Next, I want to talk about high-risk situations for relapse. This was not an activity that we completed, but it goes hand in hand with the early signs for relapse. A high-risk situation is something that happens that makes us want to use alcohol or drugs. These are not things that happen by accident, but we allow ourselves to be drawn into these situations. When we're there, we can say that it's not really our fault, that we didn't plan it, that it just happened, and there's nothing we can do about it. These are very dangerous to our recovery. Then the activity says to read and identify the high-risk situations that apply to you. When I was reading through this, I had such a hard time relating to this because I didn't connect with any of them because of where I'm at in my recovery. I have 500 days sober, but being in rehab and being only a few days, a few weeks sober, these situations are situations that you could be in before you get sober, before you're really committed to being sober, more when you're in active addiction, but it's almost a scale of where you fall in your recovery. This activity was to read and identify the high-risk situations that apply to you. So you would check the box. Problems force us to stop. We aren't using drugs or alcohol because things are crazy right now. We leave the door open to use again once things have calmed down. In that situation, it's like, okay, I have a lot going on with school and with work right now. I'm going to stop drinking because I don't really have time for that. But once I clean up my shit, then I'm going to start drinking again. The next one, we don't make the connection. We tell ourselves that the real problem isn't our drinking or using drugs. The problems are unrelated. We're simply using because of the problems. It's because we have these problems that we're using drugs or alcohol. It's not the drugs or alcohol that are causing the problems that we're experiencing. We deny we're addicted. We tell ourselves we are in control of our use. It doesn't control us. We can stop anytime we want to. This was the phase that I was living in before I went to rehab. I really thought that I could stop drinking whenever I wanted to, but upon trying and failing, I realized I cannot stop drinking on my own. I'm going to need extra help. We push people away who can help. We prove we are not an addict by spending time around people who are okay with our use. We convince ourselves that the people who think we should stop are really not our friends. If they would leave us alone, everything would be fine. Backing up, I was in this phase as well, and I would choose friends that would go out and drink and get drunk. That way, it didn't seem like I had a problem. I was just doing the same thing that they were doing. We start romanticizing the high. We think about how good it was to use in the past. We exaggerate the good times and minimize the pain and problems. We believe that we always felt good and never had problems when using. There was a time in September of 2022 that I stopped drinking for about a week, and I remember feeling this exact same thing that this is describing. I remembered how good it was when I was drinking. I didn't remember any of the bad times, but definitely just romanticized the feeling of being drunk, the sensation that it gave me, all of the positives, but didn't recount any of the negatives at all. We equate sobriety to awful. We focus on how hard it is to stay away from using, how this is nothing but pain and problems. We can never have a good life. We use magical thinking. We believe that use can magically fix us and solve all of our problems. We convince ourselves that this time we will be able to control it. It will just be this one time, then we will stop. We recycle addictive thinking. We turn the thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could use, into a desire, I want to use, into an urge, I should be able to use, into a craving, I need to do it now. I have no other choice. When I talk about my 2 days of relapse in season 2, that is exactly where I was at, what I was thinking, and there was no other choice. I was doing it, and that was it. I'll talk about that more in season 2. We get into problem situations, we make problems worse, overcommit, get frustrated, argue and fight, or want to fit in with our old friends. We get around alcohol or drugs, we put ourselves in situations where we want to use despite our commitment not to. We want to feel better, change our energy, hang out with old friends, people use around us, want better sex, face a loss, remember painful experiences, feel trapped, or get sick. Putting yourself in that situation as an addict almost 100% puts you in a situation for relapse. That is the highest risk situation. As you can kind of hear, the list gets worse as it goes down. I, as an alcoholic, can relate to every single step in this list as I've experienced one of them or all of them at one point in my life. The last segment in early signs of relapse is an activity that I completed in rehab that was mapping high-risk situations for relapse. I was to think of a high-risk situation that happened in the past and give it a title. I titled it Going Out with Friends. How does this situation increase my risk of use? I wrote being around alcohol and other people using. Now, right before I went to rehab, I was in a time of my life where I was struggling to find where I fit in. Who were my friends? I didn't do much outside of work, which I'm a teacher. I didn't do much outside of that. So trying to find who my friends were, I had just become friends with a couple of people who I would go out with, and I would be around alcohol, and they were very encouraging to drink, and they didn't really know my background or know my story, but those were the types of people that I was choosing to hang out with. So that's what I was basing this off of, because that was the path that I was going on. I know I'm in a high-risk situation when I'm around friends who are drinking or at an establishment that promotes and sells alcohol, bars, clubs, etc. How well can I manage this situation without using? And why did I rate it that? I rated that a 0 because at that point of my sobriety, there was no way that I was going out to a bar or a club and not ordering a drink or being strong enough to stay sober and not want to drink. I wrote because being in places like that is a trigger to want to drink, obviously. How am I able to avoid this situation and why do I rate it that? I said not going out to those places with friends suggests doing something else and being honest about why I don't want to go. When I came back from rehab, I had a lot of adjusting to do because I was making a radical change in my life to stop drinking, and that meant cutting off some people that I didn't need to be friends with. I wanted to continue to stay sober. I wanted to continue to create a better life for me and my family. And in order to do that, I had to cut off some people that I considered friends at the time. When I really thought about it, I realized we're no longer friends. I had to set boundaries with those people, which leads me into my next segment, which is what is a healthy boundary? Boundaries are not just physical, but they can also be emotional, spiritual, cultural, yada yada, etc. In relationships, a boundary represents the limits marking our personal territory or ourselves. Each of us has our own territory. Our boundaries define and contain that territory, our bodies, minds, emotions, spirit, possessions, and rights. We are taught about boundaries by our primary caregivers, role models, environment, and culture. If we had poor role models growing up, if there was emotional, verbal, sexual, or physical abuse, neglect, poor discipline or abandonment, chemical dependency, or other compulsive behaviors were present in our families, then we probably did not develop a strong sense of our boundaries. If we lived with someone who tried to control our thoughts, bodies, or feelings, we may not have grown up to know we have rights to privacy, our own thoughts, personal space, etc., and may not have even questioned what we perceived as just the way things are. We may still be functioning with this perception as an adult. If we have weak boundaries, we may get lost in other people's territory or become vulnerable to invasion by those that would harm us. If our borders are too thick or rigid, we risk not letting anyone get too close to us. Without any boundaries at all, we are vulnerable to losing all we have, including ourselves. Some people are fortunate to emerge into adulthood knowing who they are and what their rights are and are not. They do not trespass on other people's territory, and they do not allow others to invade theirs. They have healthy boundaries and a solid sense of self. Other people emerge into adulthood with damage of non-existent boundaries, and still others have constructed a wall so thick around them that others cannot get close. Having problems with boundaries is a primary characteristic of codependency, but it is never too late to begin establishing healthy boundaries. If you begin to set boundaries with people who are not used to you setting limits, you may experience resistance from some of them and various forms of sabotage. This is common and to be expected with certain people. Expect it and do not let it dissuade you from your efforts to establish healthy boundaries with people in your life. If you are currently in an abusive relationship and your partner is highly motivated to control you, especially if previous violence has already occurred, then setting boundaries can be dangerous. Your partner may react angrily and or violently in an effort to regain control and retain the status quo. If this is the case, you should seek professional help from someone trained in the dynamics of battering before going any further. Boundaries also go both ways. So if you are setting a boundary with somebody, you should expect them to then reciprocate with a boundary that they're going to set for you. Also, when you're setting a boundary with somebody, it may not always go over as smoothly as you think it's going to. Some people may feel attacked by you setting boundaries. Some people may feel like you no longer want to be friends with them or you don't like them anymore because you're setting a boundary. So it's very important to make it clear that it's not out of spite, it's not out of hate, it's out of your own personal well-being that you are setting this boundary for the good of yourself and not for the displeasure of somebody else. I personally struggled with that when setting boundaries, and I have had a pushback with people as well, and people thinking that I'm mad at them because I'm setting this boundary. So it's so important that you explain to people when you're setting a boundary. That way you have very clear communication about where you're coming from, where they're coming from. Make sure that it ebbs and flows the way that it should when you're setting these boundaries. That leads me into the next segment, which is setting boundaries and the steps in doing so. When setting healthy boundaries, here are 10 things for you to remember. Number 1, when setting a limit with someone, do it clearly, briefly, and firmly without anger. Number 2, plan on being tested when setting boundaries. Number 3, be prepared to follow through by acting in congruence with boundaries. Our behavior needs to match our boundaries. Number 4, we don't have to construct a blockade with rigid boundaries, nor do we have to become hypervigilant. We just need to pay attention to ourselves as well as to what others are doing. Number 5, we may feel uncomfortable the first time we set a boundary. Correction, we will feel uncomfortable the first time we set a boundary. Remember, this is normal. It will take practice to feel more comfortable. Some people find it helpful to practice beforehand in a mirror, into a recorder, or role play with a friend or therapist. Something that I did with my therapist when I was in rehab was I role played a conversation that I needed to have of me setting a boundary, and that helped the conversation go over so much better because I'd already prepared it. I had kind of prepared myself for what could be said back so that I had a plan moving forward with having that conversation. Because it's uncomfortable and it can be difficult, having a plan is the best idea. Number 6, a support system can be helpful as you strive to establish and enforce boundaries. This was something that was really helpful when I was in rehab because a lot of the uncomfortable conversations I had to have with people in my personal life, I could role play those conversations with the people that I was in rehab with, and they understood what was going on. Because when you spend 30 days straight with people and have very intimate conversations in group sessions with people, you get to know them on a level that's different than anybody else. Having that support system really helped to get me through my time there and helped me to have conversations that I don't think I would have been able to have had I not been able to talk with other people. Number 7, allow yourself to be responsible for what is yours. Allow others to manage their own stuff. This relates to circle of control, which I'll talk about in the activity that I'm going to explain next. Number 8, setting a boundary is about making a choice. It's not to control another person's behavior. For example, when you set a boundary about not being around active alcoholism, your boundary is about your choice not to be around active alcoholism, not to control someone else's drinking. That person can choose to drink or not drink. When I first came home from rehab, my husband made the choice to stop drinking alcohol as well. I always told him that if he wanted to drink, he had that option because my not drinking was about me, not about him. He continued to make the choice to not drink, and he is still sober to this day, which is awesome. But if he were to choose to start drinking again, that choice is completely up to him. It has nothing to do with me, and I am completely fine with that choice. But it doesn't matter if I'm fine with it or not because it's not my choice to make, whether he drinks or not. I'm choosing to be sober because I want to be sober. I don't need somebody else to be sober because I choose to be sober. That doesn't even make sense. Number 9, rescuing people from responsibilities that are their own is emotionally unhealthy for us as it causes us to suffer from stress and overload that doesn't belong to us. It is also emotionally unhealthy for the other party as we are stealing from them their obligation to be responsible for the quality of their lives and keeping them from building the self-esteem that comes from accomplishment and growth. Number 10, remember, we are establishing what we like and don't like, what we want and don't want, and we are enhancing our lives. Besides, enabling unhealthy behavior in others really just keeps them sick, and that's not something we want to do. We want to uplift others, we want to empower others, so we don't want to feed into their unhealthy behavior or enable their unhealthy behavior because that just keeps them sick as well as ourselves. At the end of this page, they asked 3 questions that I answered in December of 2022. Why is establishing healthy boundaries important to me? I wrote, to be assertive and putting my comfortability and emotional needs first to prevent myself from doing things at the expense of my own mental health. In what areas of my life do I need to develop healthier boundaries? Work, friends, family. And I did all 3 of those things, and I have never been happier. The last question, what stops me from setting boundaries with friends or family? I had a fear of judgment, anger, passive-aggressive behavior, having uncomfortable conversations and awkwardness, and resistance and sabotage from other people. Some of that I did have to face when setting boundaries, but that comes with protecting your peace, and I will protect my peace all day, every day, even if it comes with some of those negative things that you have to feel from other people. Our last segment is the circle of control activity that I mentioned earlier. When you're in a time where you're feeling anxious or frustrated or angry or some emotion that you need to get things out, you can do an activity that deals with the circle of control. So over here, I have a crystal ball, and we are going to imagine that the crystal ball is our circle of control. Inside of our crystal ball is all of the things that we can control. Those are things like our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, and our actions. Everything that's on the outside of our crystal ball, those are things that we cannot control. Those are things like other people's emotions, other people's thoughts, other people's actions, other people's behaviors. Those are things that we cannot control. In times of high stress, high anxiety, high anger, heightened emotional states, making lists of things that you can control or can't control are helpful because you're able to see what you are able to have control of, and you can control those things. And when you make your list of things that you cannot control, those are things that you have to just let go. If it's not something that's within your control, it cannot be something that you continue to worry about and to stress over, because there's no amount of worry or stress that's going to help you change something that you cannot control. You need to be taking actions towards the things that you can control. Recognizing what's inside of your circle of control and what's outside of your circle of control will bring you a sense of peace you've never felt before. And like I said earlier, I will protect my peace all day, every day. So really controlling the things that are inside of my circle of control and letting things go that are outside of that has been so helpful to me in this sobriety journey. Talking about things that you can control and things that you can't control goes back to the serenity prayer, which is really big in AA, really big in addiction, sobriety, recovery. And the serenity prayer is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That wraps up the bonus episode of the Kelcie Witchno Show. Thank you guys so much for listening. There will be more bonus episode content coming out, so make sure you follow me everywhere so you don't miss it. I also will be starting a YouTube channel where I will upload all of my podcasts to YouTube. Make sure you follow me on TikTok, X, and Instagram at kwitchno. Subscribe on YouTube and give me a follow on Spotify and on Apple Music. I would greatly appreciate it. I will see y'all next time. Bye.